I'm Martin Sullivan. I'm director of the National Portrait Gallery, and thank you so much for coming and contributing to this symposium, and we do hope that there will be a lively give and take. This is one of a series of symposia called the Edgar P. Richardson Symposia that were generously supported for the National Portrait Gallery through a gift from one of our former commissioners, one of the people who sits on the board that oversees two important central questions for the Portrait Gallery: who gets in, which sitters are of such significance in American life, and which portraits are of significant interest that they ought to be in. But Bob McNeil, a longtime friend and generous supporter, made possible this symposium, and I want to thank him. And of course, the entire project, beginning with research and continuing through the exhibition itself and the wonderful book that accompanies it, has been made possible by a number of other generous donors. I'm looking about a little bit for Dr. Ella Fauché. Ella, are you here perchance? Perhaps not yet. Ella is also a member of our National Portrait Gallery Commission. She and her husband, Michael Rothfeld, have been generous contributors. Some of you may have seen, speaking of gaggle of scholars kind of milling about, our efforts to organize everyone just a few moments ago for a group photo of this extraordinary distinguished group of scholars, and Duchamp would have loved it. It was utter madness, absurdity. It took forever, and then we found ourselves doing that characteristic Duchamp frontal face and then a side view of everyone, okay? And we'll move on to the more daunting technology of PowerPoint this afternoon and hope for the best. But I suspect that it will go very smoothly. The reason that this entire project has come together with such grace and such care to detail has been through the leadership of the two co-curators, Professor Jim McManus and our own Dr. Ann Collins-Goodyear, who together, and you will hear more about the genesis of the project, but who together have really made it possible for the National Portrait Gallery to do something that has not been done before, and that has, in every aspect of it, really all of the elements of a model integration of research, exhibition, education, publication. It's astounding. So I am going to begin by thanking Anne, who is extraordinary and who has pulled all of this together to come forward and introduce the symposium. Dr. Ann Goodyear.
Marty, thank you for your very generous remarks. We're so grateful to all of you for joining us this afternoon for the E.P. Richardson Symposium on American Portraiture, offered in conjunction with the opening of the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery's exhibition, Inventing Marcel Duchamp, The Dynamics of Portraiture. It's a pleasure to have you all with us today. I'm going to borrow a page from my good friend Julie Heath and ask you all to do us the favor, if you wouldn't mind, of silencing your cell phones at this time. And I also want to let everybody know that this symposium is being recorded, video recorded, for future broadcast. For that reason, during our question and answer sessions, I will ask everybody to please use the microphone so that your comments and questions can be picked up by our cameras. Over the course of the past 5 years, Jim McManus and I have had the pleasure of thinking carefully about the nature of Duchamp's self-construction. It has been fascinating to observe the profound influence of his recognition of the fluid, unfixed nature of identity and of the shortcomings of physiognomic likeness as an analog for the representation of self or other. One of the lessons that has been driven home repeatedly is that Duchamp was above all a collaborative artist. Oh, beg your pardon, I have to turn on my PowerPoint. Thank you. So as I was saying, one of the things that has been driven home to us repeatedly is the fact that Duchamp was above all a deeply collaborative artist. Oops. Duchamp is definitely at work here today. We've witnessed such collaborations in the form of Duchamp's ongoing collaboration with Man Ray, which led to the construction of Rrose Sélavy and the Monte Carlo Bond, among many other works. We see such collaborations at play in Duchamp's subtle encouragement of the painter Daniel McMorris and the photographer Arnold Newman to create portraits that clearly reflect deep-rooted philosophical concerns of Duchamp's. We witness ongoing provocations and virtual conversations in the form of more recent portrayals, such as those of Brian O'Doherty, about which you'll hear more today, and Ray Beldner. These works create dynamic juxtapositions between the representation of self on the part of the artist and the representation of Duchamp. We invite you to visit these works and many others upstairs in our galleries. This exhibition, the first ever to combine Duchamp's innovative self-representations with those of him by other artists, represents itself a deeply collaborative effort, and one which we wish to acknowledge this afternoon. Above all, I want to stress the great value and pleasure I have derived from working closely with my co-curator, Jim McManus, on this project. Since the summer of 2004, when the idea for this exhibition was first hatched, this project has benefited from a true partnership of ideas and efforts. Along the way, numerous institutions and individuals stepped forward to help us with extraordinary generosity. Although the list is far too long to enumerate here, there are a few people and organizations to whom we wish to extend a special thank you. First, we thank our private and institutional lenders, without whom the show would not be possible. We are particularly grateful to the efforts of Jacqueline Matisse Monnier, Francis Nauman, Michael Taylor, Francis Beatty, Sean Kelly, Barbara Novak and Brian O'Doherty, and Doug and Judy Vogel for their ongoing generosity and brainstorming with us about our goals for the show and how to achieve them. Second, as Marty has indicated about these collaborative efforts, it's always impossible to stage a project of this complexity without financial support from a broad range of individuals and institutions. And for that, we want to thank the Henry Luce Foundation, the Smithsonian Institution Scholarly Studies Program, the Mark Pachter Exhibition Fund, the Florence Gould Foundation, and several generous individuals, Ella Fauché and Michael Rothfeld, Aaron and Barbara Levine, Mary McMorris and Leonard Santoro. We also thank Julie Heath and the Lunder Conservation Center for supporting new research on Jean Croti's portrayal of Marcel Duchamp. Finally, we are indebted to our colleagues at the National Portrait Gallery who committed themselves to this effort at an early moment, in particular our former director, Mark Pachter, our current director, Marty Sullivan, our deputy director, Carolyn Carr, our chief of exhibitions, Beverly Cox, our head of design and production, Nello Marconi, and many other colleagues who include Wendy Wick Reaves, Ann Schumard, Rosemary Fallon, Ed Myers, and my husband, Frank Goodyear. With regard to today's event, Jim and I wish particularly to commend Amy Basquette and Jennifer Quick. They have handled myriad details related to the symposium with characteristic resourcefulness, reliability, and grace. It goes without saying that Jim and I have continually relied upon the good offices and extraordinary understanding of our spouses, Frank Goodyear and Lonnie McManus. We recognize that no scholarly project ever represents the final word on an important subject. Indeed, it is our hope that this exhibition will continue to spawn discussion and debate. For their important role in this discourse, we thank our catalog essayists who are with us today, Janine Myleaf, Francis Nauman, and Michael Taylor. We thank, too, the superb research assistants who contributed catalog entries and a chronology to who helped us with these catalog entries and chronology for the catalog. These include Aubrey Koenig, Hannah Wong, Kate Dempsey, and Jennifer Quick. Today, we look forward to hearing from several other distinguished scholars on the subject of Duchamp, self-construction, and portrayal. Our first pair of talks by Wendy Wick Reaves and Linda Dalrymple Henderson will elucidate the cultural and intellectual context in which Duchamp developed his complex self-representation. As Wendy Reaves will explain, Duchamp's innovations in self-portrayal developed in a fertile field of widespread artistic experimentation with the genre of portraiture. As Linda Henderson will discuss, Duchamp negotiated his artistic identity against a backdrop of profound intellectual transformation, as the very nature of time and space was itself being reinterpreted. I will provide brief introductions for each speaker, whose fuller biographies are included in your symposium programs. A brief question and answer session will follow each talk. And again, please do remember to use the microphones for your comments and questions. It brings me great pleasure to introduce Wendy Wick Reaves, the founding curator of the Department of Prints and Drawings at the National Portrait Gallery and a very strong supporter of this project. She has devoted several recent exhibitions and publications to exploring the reinvention of portraiture during the 20th century. These include the upcoming exhibition, Reflections, Refractions, Self-Portraiture in the 20th Century, with an accompanying catalog of the same title, which will open next month here at the National Portrait Gallery. And we invite you all to come back to see that show in dialogue with the one we'll be discussing today. Wendy Reaves' paper today addresses Brittle Painted Masks, Portraiture in the Age of Duchamp.
Good afternoon, everyone. And many thanks to Anne and Jim for your wonderful exhibition, for organizing this symposium, and for including me among your speakers. I was also invited by Jim to wear a pink dress and a mustache for my presentation today. Now, I like pink as well as any girl, and I hope you appreciate my spring jacket, Jim. But you know, ladies of a certain maturity do not embrace the mustache. Transgendered humor is all very well, unwelcome signs of aging, not funny. Now, if I were to continue in this vein about my outfit and ladies' facial hair, I expect most of you would find such comments indiscreet. As a speaker in a scholarly symposium, my specifically gendered and middle-aged identity, my face and costume and hairstyle should not be remarkable or remarked upon. But as you've surely guessed, I intended those close to inappropriate comments to do more than just register a tone of Dada discomfort. I would like to prime the canvas, if you will, although setting the stage is the more apt analogy, for our discussions of portrayal during Marcel Duchamp's lifetime. And I wanted to remind us of a moment when self-presentation was acutely self-conscious, Identity was on display, it was performed. And portraiture in America, despite parallel conservative trends, was also highly experimental and playful. This context of portrayal and presentation frames our Duchamp exhibition, the excellent catalog essays, and the papers today. So it might be useful to peer more closely at what those notions meant in the early 20th century. How did radical experiments with identity play into the broader scope of American culture as concepts of portraiture took a roller coaster ride during Duchamp's own lifetime? In 1928, Charles Demuth made this poster portrait, apparently an homage to Gertrude Stein, one of a series of non-representational portraits which incorporated symbols, letters, and numbers to probe psychological, sexual, or spiritual aspects of his subject. If, by the way, you think you see vague reflected figures in the upper left, they aren't ghostly evocations of Gertrude or Charles Demuth. They are Wendy and her husband John Daniel on a trip to Madrid last fall trying to take this photograph. No Duchampian gestures intended, at least not consciously. But I start with Demuth not only because of the importance of his non-mimetic symbolic imaging, but also because of his central motif here of the mask. From costume balls to stage, screen, and literature, the mask was all the rage early in the century. And both as a physical theatrical costume device and as a nuanced metaphor of coded identity, the mask can stimulate our thinking about the complex ways portraiture was re-envisioned. Historically, masks, as incorporated into religious or social rituals, provided protection, disguise, enhancement, or the ability to impersonate. All those implications resonated in the revival of masks in the theater and such related arts as opera and dance. As Susan Valeria Harris Smith has documented, this widespread revival in Western culture drew upon modern thought, the divided psyches, the subconscious realities, and false social selves explored by Freud, Jung, William James, and others. Alfred Jarry's 1896 theatrical satire, Ubu Roi, with masks designed by Toulouse-Lautrec, Pierre Bonnard, and Edouard Voyard, launched extensive European interest, and that well-publicized trend was soon adapted by American playwrights and directors. Both Charles Demuth and Gertrude Stein were secretive, masters at masking themselves on questions relating to health, sexuality, professional identity, and relationships to others. Charlie never spilled over to his friends, William Carlos Williams noted about Demuth, but kept a tight-lipped and well-groomed appearance always. He gave nothing away. Demuth also understood a broader application of masking available to everyone. He evoked that protective artificial surface when he wrote about Peggy Bacon's portraits. All this work comes only out of the American scene. It could come from no other. All of it is covered, glazed with our own wit. Self-conscious self-fashioning was not a new concept at the beginning of the century. But advice books and popular writers urged the importance of a vital, dynamic public persona. Was up to be photographed today, Everett Shinn wrote to John Sloan in 1907 about his visit to Gertrude Casimir's studio just before the opening of the 8 exhibition. Great fun, he continued, being an artist with temperament. He included a dandified sketch of himself posing with hat, walking stick, and cigarette. But in the subdued palette and downcast eyes of this 1901 self-portrait, Shinn cast himself in another role, the common stereotype of artist as bohemian genius, given to hilarious hijinks or, as seen here, melancholy suffering. Play acting with keen self-consciousness, He inscribed the drawing to his idol, the actress Julia Marlowe. And let me just mention that all my examples that I'll show today are from the Portrait Gallery's collection, unless otherwise identified. Certainly, Shin was as obsessed with the theater as any artist of his day. But such presentations were hardly unusual. What everyone aimed for was personality, a word frequently evoked at the time, which had come to mean a colorful, original combination of attributes that attracted an audience. As Theodore Dreiser described it, old-time virtues such as honesty, fairness, and intellect did not suffice. Magnetism and vitality were also required. The principal manifestation of this distinction was a compelling theatricality, or as Mae West phrased it, the glitter that sends your little gleam across the footlights. It was, as historian Ann Douglas reminds us about the early 20th century, the most theatrical generation in American annals. In other words, the artist or author, scientist or socialite, along with the performer, had to assume the mask of his constructed persona. So do we see this element of self-consciousness, theatricality, and distinctive personality in portraiture after the turn of the century? Not always, but I think we can argue that artists often did search for that glitter, that flair, that distinctive, singular, heightened element. We see a change, perhaps, between the comportment of John Singer Sargent's sitter and an anxious self-portrayal by theatrical artist Lee Simonson a generation later that is less composed in one sense and more composed in another. We see some of this drama in William Zorach's image of Edna St. Vincent Millay, drawn for Century magazine just after the poet had won the Pulitzer Prize. Millay, Ann Douglas has stated, asked only one thing, expected but one safety net, and that the flimsiest and most essential, an audience. As Zorach himself noted, Edna was quite a personality, a prima donna. He captured that quality here with its firm facial contour, resolute expression, and odd, immodest gesture. The image posits a sexual and intellectual independence that reflects the poet's notorious free spirit. Stage techniques were sometimes directly incorporated into portrayal. In Marius de Zayas's charcoal of photographer Paul Haviland, one sees the influence of pictorialist photography's soft focus aesthetic, but also the artist's exposure to the theater as a drama column illustrator, suggested here in the back to the audience pose, a viewpoint from orchestra seats, and the effect of powerful footlights. Edward Steichen's photographs, like Katharine Hepburn at Wright, conveyed that heightened quality of presentation by manipulating artificial light to etch a noble profile and highlight the flesh tones of her highly contrived pose. I think you see an echo of this angular posing and dramatic lighting in Paul Meltzner's oil of Martha Graham. Marguerite Zorach depicted poet Marianne Moore with ramrod straight posture and flame red hair. Moore had just won the Dial Award and was about to become that magazine's new editor. Zorach's exaggerated elongation, bold colors, and slashing lines set Moore apart, proclaiming her growing importance in the literary world. Much of this new consciousness about posing, presentation, and portrayal grew out of profoundly new ways of thinking about the human individual. In the late 19th century, notions of portrayal of the self or others were inevitably altered by discoveries in philosophy, psychology, science, religion, and other fields. The 19th century concept of identity, as Joanne Woodall explains it, was a unique personal individuality articulated in the face. As mentioned, that concept was undermined as Freud, Jung, James, and Henri Bergson, among others, explored the nature of the self. Charles Darwin's theories had emphasized genetic predisposition, further undercutting established notions of consciously directed moral character. one could no longer presume a static, fixed, externally evident character. Identities became multiple, mutable, fractured, invented, or disguised. Portraiture, in response, at the turn of the 20th century, had to negotiate dramatically new artistic and intellectual terrain. This caused some artists to eschew mimetic representation altogether in search of a synthesis of the soul, as it was sometimes called, through abstract and symbolic portraiture like Demuth's. Gertrude Stein, shown here in a massive terracotta sculpture by Joe Davidson, helped launch such experiments, evoking the inner essence of an individual through coded reference or emotional implication. In the first decade of the century, she started composing abstract word poets of friends and acquaintances, replete with repetitive sing-song cadences and nonsensical phrases. Do you wish for, he wishes for, do you wish for, do they wish for them? Stein wrote in her portrait of sculptor Joe Davidson. Does he wish for, do they wish for him? Many, many tickle you for them. Many, many tickle you for him. Vanity Fair introduced that impenetrable prose to its readers in February 1923, along with 3 portraits of Stein, Picasso's famous oil, a Jacques Lipchitz bust, and a photograph of the author sitting for Davidson's sculpture. Certainly, Stein's experiments influenced small circles of artists and intellectuals, but they were also seeping out to a broader audience. Radical notions of portraiture appeared in poetry and music as well. E.E. Cummings, influenced by Stein, wrote portrait poems, playing with discontinuity and juxtaposition, as well as spatial arrangements of words and punctuation on the page. In 1917, he penned this poem upon the hearing of the death of Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill's defunct, who used to ride a water-smooth silver stallion and break 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pigeons just like that. Jesus, he was a handsome man. And what I want to know is, how do you like your blue-eyed boy, Mr. Death? American composer